Human rights, even especially the right to life, is really society's deciding when it's proper to kill. Does this person have a right to death? If you have a right to life, do you have a right to health care? Do convicted criminals have a right to life? Or can the state take that away? We say that there's a right to life, but all the time we're making decisions about when is it proper to kill. We are in a season of joy. Celebrations abound these last couple months of the year. As the light in the northern hemisphere dwindles, religious celebrations of light happen over and over around the world. The pagan pumpkins blow, followed by the Hindu lights of Diwali, the Buddha's Day of Enlightenment, lights of Hanukkah, more pagan lights upon a Christmas tree, and then the Star of Bethlehem welcoming the light of the world, and then finally fireworks on New Year's Eve. Lost in the hubbub of all these flashy holidays are two serious commemorations. December 10th is Human Rights Day. It commemorates the UN Declaration of Human Rights, which happened on December 10th, 1948. And then December 15th is the U.S. Bill of Rights Day. The first 10 amendments to our Constitution were ratified on December 15th, 1791. These holidays, holy days, are not celebrated. They're virtually unknown. But they undergird our ability to celebrate everything else. The freedom of religion is a basic right. The Declaration of Independence declares the pursuit of happiness a right. But the Declaration is not a legally binding document. It's not a law that can be enforced. And similarly, the UN Declaration of Human Rights is aspirational. Countries are not required to adhere to the Declaration of Human Rights in order to be members of the UN, because many nations violate those rights, including the U.S. The UN document has 30 articles or rights, and among those are: everyone has the right to life, liberty, and the security of persons. Security of persons. To me, that means that women should have the right to control their own bodies. But the Supreme Court in our nation are about to overturn that right in this coming year, and many nations still don't recognize that right. Article 4, no one should be held in slavery or servitude. And the slave trade should be prohibited in all its forms. But slavery is still a problem in this world, especially in the sex trade here in the USA. No one should be subject to torture or to cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment. But the U.S. freely admits to waterboarding captives, and believe it or not, we still have 39 captives in Guantanamo Bay. Most have not been charged with a crime. Article 14, everyone has the right to seek and to enjoy in other countries asylum from persecution. Well, the U.S. has virtually shut down its asylum program, requiring applicants to wait in Mexico until their cases are adjudicated. The current administration tried to end this policy, but was blocked by a court decision. Article 18 of the Human Rights Declaration, everyone has the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion, and freedom either alone or in community with others, in public or private, to manifest his religion or belief in teaching, practice, worship, and observance. There are those in this country who wish to make the USA a quote-unquote Christian nation based on a very narrow interpretation of that fine tradition. And now to our own Bill of Rights, which were ratified on December 15th, 1791. These were designed to limit the power of centralized government. And in this age of increased government surveillance and abuse of police power, we see that these rights are threatened. But what are rights? And how should we use them? George Carlin argued that we have no rights. He said that rights are just an idea that we made up. Let me paraphrase his rant. For to quote Carlin word for word in church is seldom safe. I do have the right to free speech, but George Carlin exercised it much more freely than I did. So I will paraphrase and leave it up to you to imagine profanity wherever you deem appropriate. If God gave us these rights, why would he give us only a certain number of rights? The Bill of Rights gives us 10. And since then, we've had to amend the Constitution 17 times. Seems like God forgot some stuff, like slavery. The British Bill of Rights has 13. The Germans have 29, the Belgians 25, the Swedish have only 6. Most countries have no rights at all. Why would God give different rights to different people in different places? Boredom? Amusement? Bad math skills? It doesn't sound like divine planning. It sounds like human planning. One group trying to control the other like they always do. If you think you have rights, go to Wikipedia and look up Japanese Americans in 1942. Over 110,000 American citizens were put in internment camps. Just when they needed their rights the most, they were taken away. If they can be taken away, they are not rights, they are privileges. That is all we have ever had. A list of temporary privileges. And it seems in recent years it has gotten shorter and shorter. I think Carlin's point has some merits. The proposed Bill of Rights had 12 amendments, but 2 were voted down. The first was technical jargon about how many people each representative would represent. And the second, one that didn't make it into the Bill of Rights, was no law varying the compensation of the services of the senators and representatives shall take effect until an election of representatives shall have intervened. Basically, senators and representatives can't give themselves a raise. The senators and representatives decided against that. We may venerate our founders, but they were definitely politicians. When we think of rights, a privilege that we vote on, it makes more of a responsibility to exercise them. Whenever we think of our rights, we also have to think of our responsibility. If we ignore our rights, they just might go away. But there is a difference between a right and a privilege. A privilege is getting what you want. It only becomes a right if we work to give it to all people. Privilege plus responsibility makes a right. So let's look at our Bill of Rights. The First Amendment says Congress should make no law respecting the establishment of religion, prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or the press, or the right of the people to peaceably assemble, and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. They packed a lot of rights into that First Amendment. Free religion, free speech, free press, freedom of assembly, and freedom of petition of the government. Freedom of assembly is enforced differently. We saw troops interrupt a peaceful protest so a president could get a picture of himself with a Bible in front of a church. Yet when violent racists took the Confederate flag right into the lobby of our Capitol, the police were not called, troops were not called. A free press is trickier. In some ways, especially in these days of the internet, we have more freedom than we ever have had. Anybody can say anything and have a worldwide platform. How do we police the spread of lies? Should there be a rule? Should there not be a rule? It gets trickier because what I think is a lie, other people will call the truth. And so that's why we cannot be silent with our truth, because the only real way to counteract lies is tell the truth louder and more frequently than the lies. The lies spread against COVID-19 vaccines have cost lives. It is like yelling fire in a crowded theater. It is using speech to harm the lives of other people. And so when we say that you shouldn't yell fire in a crowded theater, perhaps there are some rules that we could put on to lies, but I only want those rules enforced by me. I don't want anybody enforcing those rules upon me. And so that's where it gets very tricky. The Second Amendment is that a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of the free state, the rights of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. This is an interesting one, much debated in our country. It's interesting when you think of why it was put in, retaining these rights to the state, because the states did not want to have to wait for an act of Congress to fight internal insurrections. And who would be doing internal insurrections in the late 1700s? Well, it would be American Indians and blacks. And so this law is racist in its core, because they didn't run out and give guns to all the slaves and all the Native American neighbors that they had. The Third Amendment says we do not have to house soldiers during the time of war. So we're in a constant war against terrorism, so I'm wondering when this law might take effect, but this doesn't seem to be something that is asked of us anymore. The Fourth Amendment requires search warrants, and it has been interpreted as a right to privacy, although privacy is not in the statement. And so there's a debate about what constitutes illegal search and seizure. If a police asks for ID, do you need to cooperate? It is recommended if you do not want to be physically harmed, although you have a right not to be physically harmed, it happens. And is the privacy of a woman's conversation with her doctor private? Is that considered a right? And it's part of that, on the privacy thing, that Roe v. Wade was passed. But privacy is a crazy thing. I could sell my privacy to private companies. I have 2 keys on my key ring: my house, my car. And then I have all these keys to my life, all these stores that know my buying habits and which ads to send to me. And so, what is it that we want if we don't want to be searched? How much access does the government have to my shopping history? Sixth Amendment, all criminal prosecutions by accused shall enjoy the right to a speedy and public trial by an impartial jury. Well, I could spend a week on every little phrase in that. But what constitutes speedy, public, impartial? Does this happen all the time? It won't unless we keep watching. The Seventh Amendment guarantees right to jury trials and lawsuits over $20, which was a considerably more money back in the 1790s than it is now. The Eighth Amendment restricts cruel and unusual punishment. But what is cruel and unusual? Our overcrowded prisons, our death penalty cases, and the death penalty attempts that go wrong and people suffer. The Ninth Amendment actually addresses George Carlin's concern. It says any rights that are not enumerated here, you can't say that they don't exist because they're not enumerated. The people and the founders said, yeah, there's lots more rights. We just don't have time to name them all, and we should always be looking for more. And just because it's not listed in the Constitution does not mean it doesn't exist on some level for each individual. So people now talk about a right to food, shelter, health care, education. But none of these are automatic. These are privileges which we try to extend to as many people as possible. And we have the responsibility to argue and demand any new privileges we want to enshrine as rights. The Ninth Amendment enumeration of the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people. That's what we've been talking about, that those rights exist at some level. But I find that the Ninth Amendment in our country's history has been countered by the 10th Amendment. The powers not delegated to the United States Constitution nor prohibited to it by the states are reserved to the states respectively or the people. Reserved to the states. This is the states' rights argument. Whenever anybody is arguing states' rights, they point to the 10th Amendment. But I have found that those who argue states' rights based on the 10th Amendment tend to destroy the individual rights recognized by the Ninth. States' rights have been used to defend slavery, resist desegregation, resist national environmental laws. Some states wish to ban same-sex marriage. Some states are changing voter eligibility, disfranchising many voters. Some states have even made it possible for states to declare that the voice of voters are null and void if the partisan elected election board does not like the result. We are facing many challenges. and they're overwhelming. And it feels impossible for an individual to make a difference. But one way to do this is to join with other like-minded people. In North Carolina, we're fortunate to have the UU Justice NC, the Unitarian Universalist Justice Ministry of North Carolina. UU Justice NC joyfully organizes UUs to contribute to a transformative movement for justice through collaboration, spiritual grounding, and imagination. We are a network of the Unitarian Universalist congregations and individuals in UUs in North Carolina who are working to give life the shape of justice. And for more information, you can go to their website, which is uuforwardtogether.org. Now, some may say that Human Rights Day is not a religious holiday, but I wouldn't say that it isn't spiritual, because our inherent worth and dignity of every person is at the root of all the other choices we make. And some may argue that churches being involved in justice is a violation of the separation of church and state. But UU Justice NC does not endorse any political party or candidate. It advocates the values we hold dear. We must not only affirm and promote the inherent worth and dignity of each person, we must work for it. And you can do this every Friday. You can join people on a Zoom call and talk about the petitions that you want to sign. And it's kind of a neat thing to see people from around the state, some of the people that I've met in our travels. And it's just kind of an interesting thing to do. It's available to anybody who wants to go to the website and log on. Any individual can donate to UU Justice NC, and they also ask congregations to become supporting members, and our board will be addressing that in an upcoming meeting. The Reverend Meg Riley writes, prophetic Unitarian Universalist congregations draw from the deepest parts of Unitarian and Universalist theology, committing themselves to the wisdom of these theologies, the sense that everybody has potential and everyone should be included. They embody radical caring, radical in the sense in the very roots and the place of their mission. Being a UU is not a simple faith. We don't come to church on Sunday, magically erase all our sins, only to repeat all those sins in the upcoming week, knowing that we'll get them erased in the following week. We're not trying to avoid sin, we're trying to do good. And Sunday service isn't the end of our service, it's the beginning. Each week we come and we recommit to what's important in life. And then in the next 6 days, we do everything that we can with our energies and all the else that we have to do some good in the world. And then on Sunday, we come back to get recharged, because lots of things that we try just seem like we're sending letters into the wind, casting our bread upon the waters. It's, you write to a congressperson and you wonder, did they even read it? You know that there's probably some intern that put a check mark on your letter, put it in a pile. And so all your great words in saying why you're for or against something is reduced to a check mark. And it can feel humbling. And it can feel empty. And so that's why we need to come and say, it is important. It is important to do something even in the face of when it seems like it's not working. Because silence to evil is always interpreted as consent. And I talked to somebody who was in the Quaker lobbying office, and they said, well, we're against the next war. And we know we're not going to stop it. So I have to find a way to feel the strength of saying advocating for peace is its own inherent good. And I'm going to do it, regardless of how many people listen. Occasionally people do listen. Occasionally, if we get enough people to join us and say, these rights are important. It is important for people to have freedom. Even people we don't like deserve freedom. I remember being very angry when the ACLU advocated in one occasion let the Nazis march in Skokie, a Jewish suburb of Chicago. It's a horrible thing. Horrible. But that right, if you're not going to protect the free speech of people you hate, how can you protect your own free speech? And so this is hard work. It is hard work. And we will find ourselves that our principles take us to places that we don't like sometimes. And that's why we need to come together each week to say, how's it going? How was this last week with the work you were doing in the world? Some will be excited, some will be discouraged. Hopefully we can create a balance that allows us to keep on moving forward and help everybody stand up for their rights. May we bless and be blessed.